You get used to the dark faster than people think. 40 meters under the North Sea in November, kill your torch, and you could hold your glove in front of the visor and see nothing at all. That part never bothered me. What bothered me later was that I saw another man's face down there in perfect clarity, and everyone topside swore he was never in the water. I'd been on the platform about 3 weeks by then, one of the older installations west of Bergen, four-legged jacket structure, been out there since the 80s. Company had brought a team of us in to inspect and repair fatigue cracking on one of the main legs. Standard stuff: grind, prep, weld, NDT, move on. I was on rotation with 2 other divers and a supervisor named Ewan who ran the shack up top. Ewan spoke into the comms like he was reading you a bedtime story. Calm, low, no wasted words. When something was wrong with Ewan's voice, you knew before he finished the sentence. The morning of the dive was ordinary in every way that matters. Coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since the last shift. The smell of diesel and salt on the walkway out to the moon pool. That specific cold that gets into your teeth before you've even suited up. One of the roustabouts, a kid we called Tam, joked that the sea looked friendly today. It didn't look friendly. It looked flat and gray and about the same temperature as a morgue drawer. I was on hot stick that day, wet welding at depth, arc going, hyperbaric chamber ready in case anything went sideways on the way up. The plan was a series of pad welds on a doubler plate they'd already tacked onto the leg. Half an hour of prep, an hour of actual work, then out. Nothing exotic. Descent was normal. Currents were manageable. Vis was maybe 2.5 meters, which is honestly better than I usually get out there in the autumn. The leg came out of the murk the way those things always do, this huge gray shape that only makes sense when you're right on top of it. I found my mark, checked the preheat, called it up. Ewan, on station, beginning first pass. Copy that, all yours. I got about 10 minutes in. First pass had gone clean. I was reaching for the wire brush to knock slag off when I felt something that isn't really a feeling. It's more like your body noticing water displacement before your brain does. Something moved off to my left, on the outboard side of the leg. I turned my head. There was a diver about 3 meters from me, not swimming, standing in that neutral buoyancy way you do when you've been at it long enough to just hang in the column without thinking about it. I want to be careful here, because after the fact, everyone wanted me to describe him like a ghost. He wasn't a ghost. He was a man in a suit. That was the whole problem. The suit was wrong. It was a hard hat rig, but not the Kirby Morgan 37 we all wear. The shell was rounder, older looking, painted a dull yellow that had gone almost green with age. The umbilical coming off the back of it was thicker than ours and wrapped in some banded sheath I didn't recognize. There was no comms box I could see, no strobe, no helmet light. My torch caught the faceplate and I could see him through it, like the glass was cleaner than mine. He was older, maybe 50s, gray stubble, deep lines at the corners of his eyes. He was looking straight at me. I keyed the comms. Ewan, I've got another diver down here. Who's in the water? There was a pause. Not a long one. Ewan's voice came back the same as always. Say again, you're the only one in the water. There's a diver about 3 meters off my port side. Hard hat rig, not one of ours. Another pause. I heard him talking to someone off mic. Then, stand by, confirming with the bridge. The diver hadn't moved. He was watching me through the glass. I remember the small stuff more than the big stuff. There was a scratch on his faceplate, a curved one near the top. His umbilical went off into the gloom to my left and just kept going, not up toward the surface, but sideways, into the dark, under the jacket. Then he shook his head, slow, deliberate, left, right, not the shake you give when you disagree with somebody. It was the shake you give a kid when he's about to touch a stove. Do not do that. He did it 4 times. I counted later, sitting on the bunk trying to piece the shift back together. 4. Then he raised his right hand, slow, and pointed straight down. I looked down. When you're welding on a leg like that, most of your attention is in a small window, maybe half a meter around your hand. Everything else is context. You trust the schematic. You trust the survey the ROV did last week. You don't spend time looking at the structure a meter below where you're working, because that's not your job that day. I looked down. There was a split in the leg. It ran along the weld line of the pipe below the doubler plate, a clean dark line about the length of my forearm. On one side of it, the metal had lifted maybe 2 centimeters out of true. You could have slid a screwdriver in there. I put my glove against it and the edge was sharp, fresh, no marine growth on the inside of the crack at all. This was not old damage. This was live, moving damage on a load-bearing member, and it was directly below where I was about to put a series of welds that would have locked the plate in and transferred loads straight across it. If I'd finished that pass, and the next big swell came through, or the next tide change with any weight on the jacket, that leg would have gone. I keyed comms again. My voice came out flatter than I expected. Ewan, aborting. I've got a through crack on the primary right under the doubler. It's not on the drawings. I'm coming up. Copy. Come up clean. Take your time. I looked back to my left. He was gone. Not swum away, gone. No silt disturbance, no bubble trail, no umbilical trailing off into the dark. 2, maybe 3 seconds while I was looking at the split, and the whole picture on my left had reset to gray water and structure. I did the ascent by the book. Stops, deco, no rushing. My hands were steady the whole way, which I think about sometimes. They shouldn't have been. When they cracked the hatch on me at the top, Ewan was standing there with his arms folded and a look on his face I couldn't read. Nobody else was down there, he said. We had 2 ROVs in the water. One on the north leg, one on you. Neither one saw a diver, neither one saw anything. Somebody was down there, Ewan. I'm telling you what the feed shows. They pulled the ROV footage that afternoon. I watched it in the shack with him and the OIM. You can see me on the leg. You can see the leg. You can see, if you know where to look, the shadow of the split under the doubler plate. There is no second diver in any frame, no umbilical, nothing sitting where I said he was standing. They kept the platform down for 2 days. Engineers flew out. The crack was real. Worse than I'd even seen at depth, once they got proper light on it. The report that eventually came back used a lot of careful language about undetected fatigue propagation and inadequate inspection intervals. There was a small internal review. A few people got moved around. The leg got a proper repair, done by a different crew with a different plan. I wrote my incident report the night I came up. I put the diver in it. I described the suit, the yellow shell, the banded umbilical, the scratch on the faceplate, the head shake, the pointing. I described it plainly, the way I've told it to you, because that's what happened, and I'm not in the habit of dressing things up. When the final report came back weeks later, cleaned and formatted and stamped, everything I'd written was there. The times, the location on the leg, my description of the crack, almost word for word. The paragraph about the other diver was gone, not rewritten, not softened, lifted out like it had never been on the page. The paragraph above it and the paragraph below it had been stitched together so cleanly that if you hadn't written the original, you wouldn't know anything was missing. I asked Ewan about it once, on the chopper back to Aberdeen at the end of the hitch. He looked out the window for a while before he answered. You saw what you saw, he said. I believe you saw it, but there's no box on the form for what you saw, so they took the box away. I've done a lot of dives since. Different company, different sector, I've never seen him again. What I do sometimes when I'm on a leg and I've got the torch going and I'm about to lay down a pass is I stop for a second and I look down. Not because I think he'll be there, because he was right once and I owe him that much. This happened in October 2021, and I still catch myself replaying it whenever I'm driving late and my mind wanders. I was in New Orleans for a wedding, a college buddy who'd moved there for a girl and decided to make it permanent. I flew in the morning of, sat through the ceremony, drank enough at the reception to be useful for stories, and not much else. And by around 1 in the morning, I was in my rental car, heading back to the place I'd booked out past Mid-City. I didn't know the city. That's the important part. I'd used the GPS to get to the venue, and I was using it to get back. And my phone was on maybe 14% because I'd been showing pictures to my buddy's aunt for half an hour. The AC in the rental smelled faintly like someone else's cologne. It was a white Nissan Sentra, and the driver's seat wouldn't stop clicking a notch back every time I shifted my weight. The route took me through a stretch of streets I couldn't name if you paid me. Somewhere off Claiborne, I think. Not the tourist part, not the pretty houses with the porches. It was that other New Orleans, the one where half the streetlights are out and the other half buzz orange, and the shop fronts have hurricane shutters that never come down. I remember passing a laundromat that still had its light on, one guy inside just standing there looking at a machine that wasn't running. I hit a red light at an intersection with a gas station on one corner and a boarded up building on the other. Nobody at the pumps, not another car at the light. Just me, my little rental humming, and the tick-tick of the turn signal because I was planning to go left even though I wasn't sure why the GPS wanted me to. That's when I saw him in the side mirror. A guy, running, full sprint, coming up the sidewalk toward my back bumper. He wasn't just jogging, he was throwing his arms in the air, waving them big, the way you wave at a boat that's already leaving the dock. His mouth was moving. I couldn't hear a thing through the closed windows and the AC. I want to be honest about what I did next, because I've thought about it 100 times since. I locked the doors. I didn't decide to. My hand went to the button on the armrest before I even understood what I was reacting to. 4 little clunks. Then I put both hands back on the wheel and stared straight ahead at the red light, which had never in my life felt so slow. He reached the car. He was maybe 40, 45, wearing a gray shirt that was dark under the arms with sweat. He came right up to the passenger window and slapped it, open palm, twice. Then again, he was saying something. I could see the word please. I could see it clear as anything. His face wasn't angry. It was that other thing. The one you don't see very often on grown men in public, where the mouth goes loose and the eyes get too wide, and you can tell whatever is happening to him has already broken past his ability to be embarrassed about it. I looked straight ahead. I want you to understand. I wasn't proud. I wasn't even really thinking. I was doing what a guy who grew up watching every carjacking video his mom ever emailed him does, when a stranger runs at his car at 1 in the morning in a city he doesn't know. He was on the passenger side, which meant if I rolled the window down and he grabbed the frame, I'd have to reach across the whole car to do anything about it. I remember thinking that, not in words. Just in the way your body already knows the geometry of a bad situation. The light turned green. He hit the window one more time, and I felt it in the door panel through my elbow. I lifted off the brake. The car started to roll, slow at first, because part of me was still hoping he'd step back on his own, and I wouldn't have to be the guy who drove away from a person. He did step back. He put both hands on top of his head like people do at scenes of accidents, the universal gesture for oh no, oh no, oh no. And I gave the Sentra some gas and went through the intersection. I looked in the rear view. He was standing in the middle of the street, right on the double yellow, watching me leave, not running after me, not shouting, just standing there with his hands still on his head, getting smaller in the mirror. I drove maybe 3 blocks. I want to tell you what I was thinking during those 3 blocks, and I can't really, because I don't think I was thinking anything. The radio was on low, some late-night talk station, a woman's voice talking about hurricane season being over, the AC clicking. I remember passing a stop sign without stopping fully because there was no one anywhere. And then, somewhere between one block and the next, my brain finally caught up with what my eyes had actually seen. Behind him, in the mirror, there'd been something on the sidewalk, a shape, dark, long, the kind of shape a person makes when they aren't standing up. I'd registered it and filed it under trash bags or a pile of clothes because that stretch of sidewalk had plenty of both, and because my whole brain had been busy with the man at my window. But now, going back through the image the way you rewind a bad dream, I could see it clearly. It hadn't been trash. It had been the shape of someone lying on their side, one arm out. That was why the guy had been waving. I pulled over, put the hazards on, sat there for maybe 5 seconds with my hands on the wheel and my whole face hot, and then I made a U-turn in the middle of an empty 4-lane and I drove back. He was still there, now crouched down next to the shape on the sidewalk. When my headlights swept over him, he looked up and his face did a thing I'm not going to forget. It wasn't relief. It was more like the way a dog looks when you come home earlier than expected. Just, oh, you. Okay, I got out, left the car running. I said, I'm calling right now, like it was some kind of password I needed to say out loud before I was allowed to be there, and I dialed 911 with hands that would not stop shaking enough to hit the right buttons the first time. The person on the ground was older, maybe 60, a man, thin, in work pants and a button-up. His eyes were open, and he was breathing, but the breathing was wrong. It was doing that thing where the chest works too hard, and the mouth is open and no sound is coming out except a kind of wet clicking. The guy in the gray shirt was holding his hand, both of his hands wrapped around the old man's one, and talking to him in a low voice I couldn't make out. I gave the address to the dispatcher. I had to squint at the street signs. I told her he was conscious. I told her he was breathing, but I didn't know if he was breathing right, and she told me an ambulance was 6 minutes out. 6 minutes felt like a joke. 6 minutes felt like a year. They came in 4. I don't remember the ambulance pulling up as much as I remember the light from it, red and white, climbing all over the storefronts and the trees. 2 paramedics, a woman and a big guy with a shaved head. They were on the old man in about 10 seconds. Heart attack, one of them said. Not to me, to the other one. They had him on the stretcher and in the back of the ambulance before I really understood what was happening. Then a cop car showed up. Then another one, and I ended up standing next to my rental for the better part of an hour, giving a statement to a patrol officer who wrote everything down on a clipboard like it was 1994. I told her the truth. I told her I hadn't opened the door. I told her I'd driven 3 blocks before I figured it out. She didn't react to that part. She just kept writing. At the end she said, "Sir, you came back. That's the part that matters." I don't know if she meant it or if it's something she says. The guy in the gray shirt stood off to the side the whole time, talking to a different officer, drinking a bottle of water somebody had handed him. He didn't look at me for most of it. I didn't look at him either. I don't know how to describe what was between us right then. It wasn't anger. It was more like we both knew something about me that neither of us wanted to say out loud. When the cops were done with both of us, he walked over, slowly. He was younger up close than I'd thought at the light, maybe 35. His shirt was still dark under the arms. He stopped about a foot away, and he put out his hand. I shook it. He held on a second longer than a normal handshake. He looked me in the face. He didn't say anything. Then he let go, and he nodded once, and he walked back to his own car, which turned out to be parked half a block up the street with the driver's door still open from when he jumped out to try to flag someone down. I sat in the Sentra for a while before I put it in drive. The old man lived. I found out because the officer with the clipboard had taken my number and she called 2 days later to tell me, which she said she didn't usually do. She said the paramedics told her if the ambulance had come even a couple of minutes later, it would have been a different phone call. I flew home the next afternoon. I didn't tell my buddy. I didn't tell the girl I was seeing at the time. For a long time, I didn't tell anybody, because every version of the story I tried out in my head had me sounding either like a hero or like a coward, and I wasn't either one. I was just a guy in a rental car who locked his doors, and then, 3 blocks later, remembered he had eyes. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. That handshake was enough. The terminal was on the west side of Newark, tucked between the turnpike ramp and a row of scrapyards that hadn't shipped anything in years. October 2021. Third week of my rotation on nights, 10 to 6. You have to understand the terminal was already dead by then. The company had announced the shutdown in August. Contracts were being wound down, trucks rerouted to a bigger hub in Elizabeth, and by that October we were running maybe 2 loads a week when we used to run 40. My job was mostly to sit in the booth, check a screen, and pretend the place still needed guarding. 16 dock doors. Most nights only 2 had trailers parked at them. The booth sat right at the front gate, small, heated, a laminated clipboard on a hook, and a small color TV that got maybe 6 channels through the antenna. My boss, a guy everybody called Mac, had told me on my first shift, "Don't fall asleep, don't let anyone in who isn't on the sheet, and don't touch the AC." That was the whole job. The first Tuesday of the month I was working through a tray of pasta from the deli on McCarter. The clock over the door read 2:03. The lot lights outside were the yellow sodium kind, so everything past the fence had this washed color, like a photograph left in a car window too long. That's when I noticed him. He was on the far side of the street, standing on the strip of concrete between the curb and the fence of the scrapyard opposite. Not on our side, not at the gate, just standing there, looking across at our terminal. I watched him for a while. I figured he'd be gone in a minute. I ate. I checked the camera feeds, which mostly showed empty pavement. When I looked back up, he was still there. Now, I want to be honest about this. The first thing that goes through your head in that job isn't fear. It's paperwork. If a guy hangs around the fence and does something stupid, you have to fill out an incident, and Mac hated incidents. So I kept an eye on him, hoping he'd move along and save me a form. He didn't move, not for what must have been 6 or 7 minutes. His hands were down at his sides. He wasn't smoking, wasn't on a phone, just facing the yard. I picked up the radio and then put it back down. There was no one useful to call. The other guard, Reyes, was doing his rounds down by the maintenance bay and wouldn't come back for another half hour. If I called dispatch, I'd feel like an idiot. A man on a sidewalk isn't a crime. I unclipped the flashlight, put on my jacket, and walked out. The street was silent in that particular way an industrial road gets at night, where the closest sound is the turnpike a quarter mile off. A soft, steady hush like an ocean nobody wanted. My boots on the asphalt sounded loud. He turned his head as I crossed, so he saw me coming, and he didn't move. That surprised me. Most people, if you approach them in a uniform at 2 in the morning, either walk off or get twitchy. He was maybe 40. Clean shave, glasses, a dark barn jacket over a button-down, slacks, regular shoes, not sneakers. Not what a guy sleeping rough looks like, not what a guy casing a place looks like. His hair was going gray on the sides. He had his hands in his jacket pockets when I got close, but he pulled them out slow when he saw me looking, like he understood the etiquette of it. I stopped about 8 feet away, kept the flashlight low. "Evening," I said. "You need something?" He looked at me for a second before answering, not confused, just taking his time. "No," he said. "I'm sorry, I know how this looks." "How does it look?" He kind of smiled at that, but not in a happy way. He looked back at the terminal over my shoulder. "I worked here," he said, 12 years, in receiving mostly, then dispatch for the last 4. "Okay. They shut it down tomorrow. I mean today, technically. Friday's the last day for the crew still on payroll, but the trucks stopped tonight. There isn't a next Monday." I didn't know that. I knew the place was folding, but nobody had told me a date. Mac had said a few more weeks in September and hadn't updated me since. "I wanted to see it," the guy said. "I know I'm not supposed to be here. I didn't want to knock on the gate and ask, because I know you'd say no and I wouldn't have blamed you. So I just came to stand across the street for a while." He said it without any real weight, like a man reading a receipt out loud. We stood there. A truck went by on the turnpike ramp, and neither of us looked. I could hear the fluorescent buzz from the sign above our gate, the one with the company name that would be coming down inside a month. "How'd you get here?" I asked. "Parked around the corner, on Blanchard." I don't know what I was looking for on his face. Some tell, something to make me feel dumb for what I was thinking, but it wasn't there. He looked tired in a very ordinary way, and his coat had a small tear at the cuff that had been sewn up with the wrong color thread, and none of that lined up with a person working an angle. "What's your name?" I asked. He told me his first name, paused, then gave me his last name too, and added the name of a supervisor he'd worked under in 2016 without me asking, like he was offering references. I recognized the supervisor's name from an old shift sheet still tacked in the booth. "I can't let you inside," I said. "I know," he said. "I wasn't asking." I looked back at the booth. The clipboard was on the hook. The little TV was playing something with no sound. Reyes wasn't due back for a while. "Come on," I said. He didn't understand at first. He looked at me like maybe he'd misheard. 10 minutes, I said. 15. "Don't touch anything, don't take any pictures. If my partner comes back, you're a guy I let in to use the bathroom because you were sick, all right?" "All right," he said, quietly. I walked him across the street and keyed us in through the small pedestrian gate next to the truck gate. The hinge on that door had a specific squeak I heard every night for 3 months, and it made the same sound now, and he flinched a little at it. First time he'd reacted to anything. I don't know why I did it. Even that same night driving home, I couldn't put a reason on it. It wasn't kindness exactly, and it wasn't curiosity. It was closer to the feeling you get when somebody at a funeral asks to sit in the car alone for a minute and you hand them the keys without asking why. I took him around the long way, past the empty dispatch office where somebody had already taken the frame safety awards off the wall and left the nails, past dock doors 1 through 8, all closed, the numbers stenciled on the concrete apron in white paint that was flaking. Past the yard where the empty trailers used to line up 3 deep, and now there was one, sitting crooked, with the reefer unit dark. He didn't say a word the whole time. He stopped once at the door to what used to be the dispatcher's booth and put a hand flat on it, and after a second he took it off and kept walking. He stopped again by the loading ramp at door 6 and looked at the ceiling. There was nothing up there but a light fixture and some pigeon mess. I didn't talk either. I didn't point things out or ask him questions. It felt very strongly like something you were supposed to shut up during, the way you shut up in a church, even if you aren't religious. At one point, we passed the break room. The vending machine was still plugged in and humming. He glanced at it, and I saw the corner of his mouth move, just slightly, like he'd remembered something, and decided not to say it. We ended up back at the gate maybe 20 minutes after we'd gone in. I didn't check the clock. At the pedestrian gate, he stopped and turned. He put his hand out, and I shook it, which I hadn't planned to do. "Thank you," he said. "Yeah," I said. "Take care." He walked off toward Blanchard, and I heard a car door open and shut a minute later, and then an engine, and then he was gone. I went back to the booth and sat down and stared at the clipboard for a long time before I picked it up. The log wants an entry for anything that happens on the property. There's a column for time, a column for event, and a column for action taken. I wrote 214 in the time column, which was close enough. In the event column, I wrote visit from former employee, pre-approved. In the action column, escorted on site, departed without incident. There was no pre-approval, no request in the system, no email from Mac, nothing on the sheet. If anyone had checked, I would have been fired inside a week, probably reported to the licensing board that handles guard cards in this state. I knew that when I was writing it. I wrote it anyway, in the same handwriting I use for everything else. Reyes came back around 3 and asked if anything had happened. I told him no. Quiet night. He nodded and went to make coffee. The terminal closed that Friday, like the man said it would. I finished out my 2 weeks on a different site, a self-storage place off Frelinghuysen where nobody ever came at 2 in the morning for any reason at all. I still have a copy of that log page. I asked for it before they boxed up the records. Mac gave it to me without looking at it. He probably assumed I wanted a souvenir of my first real gig, and in a way I did. Some rules are for the property, some are for the people. I don't think I got those confused that night. Appreciate you watching till the end, guys. Comment which story you like the most, or which one you'd never want to experience yourself. And don't forget to check out the other vids on the channel. See you in the next one. Bye.